Really, the applause is going to be coming for our guest here today. So I'm honored to present Janis Naeve. She's our esteemed guest for this evening's Fireside chat. So Janis Naeve has been a partner of the investing team at Cota Captial since 2022. Janis oversees investments seeking to address key healthcare challenges with emerging technologies in both biotech and tech. Prior to Cota, Janis was the managing director of Amgen Ventures, the corporate venture group of Amgen Incorporated. Janis has served on the Caltech Accelerator Fund Committee, the Silicon Valley Bank Healthcare Advisory Committee, the KidneyX Accelerator, and the Advisory Council of Incubator Coalition, and was named 2021's Fiercest Women in Life Sciences by Fierce Pharma. Janis, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight.
It was my pleasure. I couldn't be happier to be here.
Great. So what encouraged you to leave Amgen after 17 years to join Cota Captial?
Yeah, emphasize that 17 years. Yeah. And it wasn't because there's a retirement program. You know, I had started my life as a scientist, as a bench scientist, because I loved science, all the way from high school. And then went on, did a PhD, did a postdoc, and then was kind of really interested in the business of science and ended up as a bench scientist in a biotech. And then ultimately, through just, as I like to call a paramecium approach, just went to things that felt good and I enjoyed. I ultimately ended up doing corporate venture at Amgen. And, you know, it was a wonderful time. Amgen was a wonderful company. It not only was really good high science, I mean, they came out with Epogen for kidney dialysis patients, so really at the forefront, but they always put patients first. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But, you know, investing for 17 years there came a point in time where I really felt like I wanted to impact the healthcare industry more. Certainly, you know, it's undergoing its throes of transformation now as we sit here. And I felt like just trying to do it just within the framework of a corporate VC at pharma just wasn't enough for me. And then also, you know, the scientist at heart in me, I just saw this tremendous bioconvergence of data science, biology, computational biology, math, all coming together. And I thought, you know, I got to have a bigger sandbox to play in as an investor. So, you know, reached out to a few folks and was fortunate enough to join Cota Captial.
So you mentioned this bigger sandbox. So what is Cota's investment thesis? Why Cota?
So I knew that I wanted to go outside my core, my core comfort zone. And I just saw that in the terms of the bioconvergence that really software, IT, enterprise, that sort of things, you know, that was really what's going to be needed in terms of this healthcare transformation. So I wanted to go to a firm that did a lot in the area of kind of tech combined with some healthcare. And so Cota Captial came along. And they are a 7-year-old firm. They do everything from seed, early stage to public company investments. Really, in the founders, their DNA. There's my science speak. Their DNA really comes from an enterprise SaaS software. You know, that type of business model. And they had several funds, fintech and SaaS and things like that. And they did some investments in the health tech space, but they were really willing to go in, you know, kind of more whole hog, right? They wanted to set up a fund that was just focused on health tech. Now's the perfect time to do it. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to come and join and kind of, you know, make my stand to try and transform healthcare by joining an investment firm that's going to be dedicated to health tech.
Great. So I have to break the ice, the reality of the healthcare climate. So in 2021, National Health Expenditure Report found that U.S. healthcare spending is at $4.3 trillion. So that's 17.8% of GDP spent on healthcare. So again, as many of you may know, that's nearly twice as much as the average OECD country. So this story sounds familiar, and which means we also all know the end, that Americans are found to experience, as many of you may have already experienced, the worst health outcomes than their peers throughout the world. So for example, life expectancy is 3 years lower than the OECD average. Given this unsustainable healthcare landscape, where do you see this change happening and why?
Well, it really is reaching the breaking point, right? If you've got, you know, we're approaching like 19% of the GDP being spent on healthcare. You know, even if you put aside the fact that we've got the worst outcomes as well, think about where that money can be better well spent. even from the national security standpoint. Everyone would agree that that kind of spend of the GDP. So it is going to have to end at some point, and we're going to have to see some changes in the system. Um, you know, it, it really hit me, as I said, I came up through pharma, um, a pharmaceutical company, and I read a book maybe about 3 or 4 years ago called, it was written by Elizabeth Rosenthal, called An American Sickness. And if you haven't read it, I would urge you to read it because it really kind of opened my eyes a bit. And what she did really was to say, hey, look, let's look at how, basically US healthcare is now is a big business, right? And so she went through and she kind of tackled the four major, hospitals and, insurance companies and pharma, drug manufacturers, device companies, and such to kind of say, well, how did we get to where we're at? And that kind of really opened my mind up, but it also kind of just threw me for a loop because it is a incredibly complex, opaque, misaligned and set of system. And so I think in order to really transform healthcare so we can just do what is so obvious we need to do, bring down the costs, increase better outcomes, and patient customer experience, that we're going to have to tackle all of these things together.
Mhm. So I think I'm hearing maybe the word health equity come up as relevant in this. So later this evening, Courtney Williamson. Courtney, are you in the room? Courtney Williamson. So she's hosting a fireside chat with Dr. Amber Johnson. Is she also possibly in the room? She'll be here. Suspense. We love it. So sure, they'll be hosting a talk on health equity and the barriers, especially to break it down in cardiology. So yes, this is a plug, but also a reminder that we all need to be talking about health equity. It doesn't need to be designated to one time slot at an event. And so with that, here in Pittsburgh, I think it's important to be grounded in the landscape, at least this event is happening. So in Allegheny County, unfortunately, we rank as one of the worst and for mortality for Black and Brown communities, and they are the most severely impacted. Yet in this room, we have representatives from nationally recognized institutions that are putting the work in to surmount this reality. So for example, Allegheny HealthWork has transformed a hospital campus in Bellevue and devoted it as a new biotech and biomedical innovation hub. We also have Optum and United Health Group who've released key reports addressing health literacy as a key indicator and action point for social determinants of health. So change is happening, but given this landscape, given what you're saying, is it fast enough? And is this the right type of change?
It's not fast enough, absolutely, right? Access is key. I was looking at some who doesn't look up statistics when they're going to be sitting on a panel and try and
You're
round it
emailing.
something.
You're in good company.
Yeah,
We love
stats.
stats.
So I came across what it says. A Deloitte study estimates that 320 billion annually in healthcare costs due to health inequities. And and these guys aren't just ballparking it. They've got probably hundreds of actuaries that have done the deep analysis. And they do it by linking it, they quantify it by linking it to healthcare spend and healthcare disparities related to race, socioeconomic status, sex, and gender. And they did it for the high cost diseases like asthma, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. 320 billion annually. And they were projecting that would probably even double, triple in the coming years. So we can't afford to not address the health inequity piece of it. Is it the good thing now is if you would have had me on this panel maybe, I don't know, 4 years ago, you wouldn't have heard it as much, right? I mean, I think right now, if you look at ESG and all the larger corporations, pharma companies, Amgen included, they've all put in place that they've all got targets to deal with health disparities. Like for a pharma company, Amgen had put together a great deal of effort in terms of clinical trials and design and diversity, right? So everyone's got these measurements that at least it's top of, if not, it's top of mind, but it's also top of what they're talking about in the boardrooms. So it is happening. But I think where I tend to get frustrated when I see it is it seems to be kind of siloed, kind of sporadic, kind of almost somewhat reduced to, well, this is one of our corporate objectives, as opposed to like, okay, what are we measuring how are we measuring how good we're doing this, right? And that's a bit where I'm a little concerned, is that it's become kind of top of the jargon, but we really need to be reducing this to actually accomplishing things and measuring things. Um, I mean, it's great that you can do the analysis like Deloitte did, but ask anybody. You ask a doctor, how do you determine, what do you think the outcome is going to be of this patient? And they will tell you unequivocally, what's their zip code? I tell you what it is. What's their zip code? And so to me, we really have to be working together to come up with ways to um, identify it simply low tech, but work with companies who are actually on the ground, who experience those, those socioeconomic conditions, and really support them in enabling them to come up with the solutions that we can underwrite and deploy.
So you started to go into this we. So who is it? Who needs to be involved in this work?
Everybody, everybody in this room, for sure. And certainly everybody who is a key stakeholder in what we call the healthcare industry. I mean, I reflect back on the book I mentioned, American Sickness, and Dr. Rosenthal took it like 4 different silos, and certain back in the day you could partition it that way. Now the lines are becoming blurred, right? So it's becoming every piece of our healthcare system is tied to yet another piece. Hospitals, providers, payers are now payers and providers. You've got doctor systems that are being acquired. It's like it's all becoming intertwined. And so the bad news is that makes it a little more complicated to deal with. The good news is that we can help leverage each other to help make these changes together. So I think that to me is where we need to start working together. And that's why I also think about the people in this room is you got people who came up into certain silos such as myself or my colleagues and peers, but now you have people who are coming into the healthcare space from all different sorts of backgrounds to help us be doing this problem solving. Think outside the box, leave assumptions at the door, don't come with the particular baggage of that's how we used to do it. That's the change that needs to happen. And I tend to be an optimist. So I think that's the surge and the change that we're going to need to be seeing to transform this $4 trillion industry.
So I hear a lot of collaboration, but there's another word that comes to mind that starts with the letter C, and it's competition. So with that, these are not often collaborative players on the same team. Many of those working in companies experiencing day-to-day that competition with which both drives innovation, not to take away the power of that, but also is part of the root and foundation of these silos that Janis is talking to. So with that, and that how sometimes fear of competition even drives apart these key players, how do you think we should be working together? What other issues need to be addressed that would preclude possible collaboration?
I reflect back to when I started working at Amgen as a corporate VC, and you come in again with certain baggage, right? And this was back in 2005, and there were other corporate VCs, maybe a handful that had started, and we were like, okay, we're going to have fun, and we're going to invest in these really innovative companies. We'd like to be the only one at the table, so we get the purview on it, but we can't. But I'll tell you, it didn't take me very long after investing in these companies that the best investments I ever made had other pharma corporate VCs at the table as well. And I mean, the numbers prove out, right? They've done an analysis. If you've got at least one corporate VC in an investment, tends to have better valuations and better exits. Boy, I tell you, I actually liked, and I think probably most of my investments ended up being with colleagues from AbbVie Ventures, from Merck Ventures, Pfizer Ventures. You bring them all in the same room, and it's almost, you become focused together on a solution which is making this particular company successful, right? It becomes pre-competitive. And this isn't a space where you're looking for companies developing molecules where you'd think you'd be fighting it out. Never happened. Never happened. It's really pre-competitive. So my vision now is to broaden that horizon, because certainly after I started Amgen Ventures, there were probably another, dozen other, biotech corporate VCs that came on the stage, right? And then now you're seeing, that almost any stakeholder in this system has a corporate venture arm that's going to underwrite and support innovation and bring their mindset to, here are the questions we need addressed and solutions we need to have. To me, maybe it's coming from my background, I think that venture capital, particularly corporate venture capital, you can work together in a safe space and you're focusing kind of outside yourselves onto a company to make it successful. And you're bringing to bear, what you know as a business to these innovators who are actually going to be discovering the solutions of tomorrow. So that's my kind of pitch of where I think these things are going to happen.
Yeah, and so putting together kind of this kit, having CVC arm, having collaboration, having safe space. What are there any other elements, within financial underwriting, within maybe is it incentives that we can start looking to continue to catalyze the transformation?
Yeah, you always come back, since we pause a minute on the whole incentive piece, is that, it doesn't take much peeling back of the onion in healthcare to figure out that there's built-in disincentives to fixing this problem anyway, right? So, we need to be able to address those in these situations and rooms, is to say, okay, look, if it's a disincentive, we need to remove it and start to align incentives. Easier said than done, but we need to do that. So there's that piece of it. The other piece of it is, bringing together people, like I just mentioned, who haven't been steeped in the issues of the day, right? Or in the certain ways things will be done. It really finding the entrepreneurs that are going to be helping with this sort of problem solving, and not having the mindset of you can identify an entrepreneur by sight, right? Is like anybody's going to be thinking outside the box. That's an entrepreneur. And it can be everything from, a scientist coming out of, a data science lab, to someone who has been innovating at a large company, but sees the problems and wants to innovate in that way. You can't, I'm a firm believer, I have found that the innovators and early adopters self-identify. If you put something out there, like funding, things like that, they will self-identify. They will come to you either in a big organization or a university. But, this is the space that we really need to be supporting, is these entrepreneurs, and not be held back by just, certain scenarios of, this is an entrepreneur, right?
And I think it's important to preface, Janice sort of alluded to, my background not being automatically connected to this space and the players in this room as much as her own. I think it's important to always reflect where we come from. I was an art teacher. So with that kind of, how can we make those pivots, and also to honor the accomplishments you had of getting undergrad in microbiology from Cal Poly Pomona, a PhD in experimental pathology from University of Southern California, and postdoctoral fellowship in neurobiology. So again, when you speak to these change agents collaborating with the folks in business, with those deeply rooted in the practice, but also those ones of how did you get here, but still all of us coming to the table. And so with that in mind, and also really honoring, I'm coming here actually as I'm at Carnegie Mellon as a policy graduate student. And I have several of my colleagues in the room, which I'm excited to have policy and business and healthcare in one place. But how, in relation to policy, and as we started to talk about incentives, how do we have these different corners of sciences, art education, I can't quite reason through at this time, but of these others' expertise coming together and collaborating with policy and maybe digging into incentives as well? How does that play in?
Yeah, boy, you touched on a lot of different points there. One I want to go back to is this disparate background that you alluded to. Even though you say, oh, I don't know how it fits. It's like everything can really fit, right? Everyone uses healthcare, right? So we all have something to bring to the table. And sometimes these tools that you have from other industries, other areas, other experiences could very well be the exact tools that we need in this type of solution, right? And even when you pointed to my background, I mean, certainly, gosh, when I graduated high school, I was going to be a stewardess, right? I did not do that, obviously. And then I thought, well, I'll just go into nursing. And then I lasted all of a semester in that because I didn't like that aspect of it, and then got my degree in microbiology. So we all take kind of these weavy sort of, paths, but, we bring what we know to the table to help with these solutions. So it's funny that, when I joined Amgen, it was more with my mindset of a scientist investing in these companies. But I'll tell you, understanding kind of the business and the importance of policymaking, I got pretty intrigued about policy and had to learn a fair amount about it, and worked with our government affairs group within Amgen. Let me tell you, I introduced myself to, they had no idea, they didn't even know they had a venture fund, to tell you that. So, you need to be able to understand kind of the spectrum. But what I learned from the policy piece of it is, policy has huge implications for, how our industry is even set up and established, right? And, for instance, one of the things that really struck me, and obviously Amgen making Epogen for dialysis patients, I was very intrigued in that space, and I sat on the KidneyX public-private partnership, is that, policies can be made for the right reasons. And I like to believe they're made for the right reasons. In that, but sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Because even in 1972, in the Medicare Act that was signed by Richard Nixon, with 11th hour, they put in a piece about making dialysis available to anyone who needed it, which made sense, right? Dialysis had reached a point in the technology life where you could actually save patients' lives who had kidney failure, right? So, why, we did the right thing, right? That no matter, no matter what your, whether you could pay for it or not, that you would have access to life-saving care like kidney dialysis. But you fast forward several decades, obviously, and where we sit now is that, 3% of the CMS budget is spent on 1% of the population, which are getting the dialysis because of so many comorbidities, and they're so sick, and the life expectancy isn't really great. 50% of the patients on dialysis die after 5 years, right? Their lives are so constrained. Well, largely, there's been very little innovation in certainly dialysis treatment since then. So, but it became a capitated system. It became, two companies really were the ones that own most of the dialysis centers, et cetera. And it just became more and more capitated, right? And so consequently, as investors, and I would talk to other investors, well, what about this really innovative company that's making an artificial implantable kidney that's based on silicone wafers, right? That can be implanted and and patients don't need to be tethered to dialysis machines. Why can't we fund this? Why can't we fund this? You can't get investors involved because they're like, well, there's going to be no return on investment for me, right? We're going to be putting probably $400, $500 million into getting this approved and on the market, and there's just no way we're going to make money on it. So there is where it's like, it shouldn't be that way, right? So policy really, really, makes a difference, and you need to be really thoughtful about it. But it's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, why would businesses change? Right? If not, markets, have their own kind of, lifestyle. They answer to Wall Street, right? So it needs that pressure from the policymakers, and Congress as such, policymakers, to apply that pressure. But it needs to be done in a really thoughtful way. And of course, now, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed, and coming from the pharma background, they really are like, no negotiation. But lost that battle. So now there's some negotiation, which is a good thing, right? And you're seeing companies like in the insulin, they're coming to the table. They're reducing the cost for insulin as it should be. But I think the other component to that is, you still have to be able to underwrite and reward innovation. So I think what we really need to have is, and I think I was talking to Cheryl Skolnick in the back, is you really need to start pulling all these pieces together, and not only through all the stakeholders from the problem-solving standpoint, involve the government and patients, but also, come up with kind of the solutions that are not going to disincentivize innovation, but is still going to take a lot of the cost out of the system.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I just want to check in, as I'm getting lost in conversation, but there's a whole evening of programming. How much time do we have, Sean?
Well,
We'll get it out. Okay.
See, I get too wordy on these things.
Oh,
So
no, it's good. Okay. So you've done a lot. You've interacted with a lot of players. You've tried to make some change where we can in different systems, markets, playing fields. So how have you seen change over your long career in science and healthcare? And what are you most inspired by?
well, if you tend to get caught up in the minute by minute and analyze it, it doesn't feel like you make much progress. But when I look back at kind of just science over the time when I started graduate school, and there were like
Mhm.
3 types of immune cells, that's how old I am. And then I look to where we are today, and it's like we have cells now that we're engineering to treat cancer. It's like, and this is still in my lifespan. Well, when I started graduate school, I used to boot up my computer with a floppy disk. So look at the changes that have been made over this period of time. So, you know, it's easy to get discouraged, but I think changes do happen because, everyone kind of works toward those changes. So I'm very encouraged from that standpoint that change will happen in this space. And I'm basically encouraged because I'm hopeful. I think everybody is good at heart. I think everybody's compelled to try and do the best they can, and the best they can for others. So I'm pretty much encouraged that we're going to be able to move forward and make a dent in this.
Okay. On that note, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experiences this evening. We look forward to continuing to learn from you, be guided by your leadership, and put to practice investing in the innovators and innovations that make healthcare of the future ours today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.